Alrighty, so we're back with the final video. I promise this is the final video. Today we're going to reveal the winner of the Great DAC Golf of 2017. The finalists are the Schiit Bifrost Multibit and the TEAC NT-503. So let's go get the paperwork part out of the way. That is the notes that I want to explain and reveal the winner. In my subjective opinion, I do have pretty good ears, pretty sensitive to things. Let's see. It's about the only thing that works well these days. Thank goodness. All right. So just a recap of our rankings here, our standings. Okay, so the last, let's see, starting from the very beginning, given if this were a football game, this is just my technique for providing my relative subjective standings as to how significantly one DAC improved over the other DAC. So if it were a football game, Cambridge DAC Magic versus Schiit Bifrost 21-7. The benchmark DAC 3 versus Sonos 49-3. Walked away with that one. And the benchmark versus the TEAC 24-14. That surprised me. That one surprised me. I had a struggle with that one. I'm like, why is the TEAC so much better? The benchmark is, highly reviewed and considered to be, flawless technically and measurement-wise and all that stuff. But measurements don't tell the whole story. There's so much mystery that goes into audio design, whether it's the selection of components or capacitors and things like that. Although, to a certain extent, I don't believe in all that, but some of it I do. And sometimes it's just an accident of design, serendipity, lucky. Just the way everything comes together to produce some kind of magical thing. No one really knows, but measurements don't tell the whole story. To a degree they do, but when you get down to infinitesimally low distortions and noises and when all the measurements are perfect between two different components, yet they sound different, there's some kind of X factor, some kind of additional element that no one can really measure or account for. And that's why listening tests or listening to components is essential, and that's what I'm doing here. Fortunately, I was able to purchase all of these DACs and compare them. What are you going to do if you can't really go to stores anymore, brick and mortars, and say, I want to compare this to that, because they don't have the time for it, and a lot of times they don't have the setup for it. Maybe some high-end shops, but so that's why I think reviews like this come in handy, particularly if the reviewer is credible, and I hope to sound somewhat credible, but who knows. But anyway, I got on a tangent. What the hell was I talking about? Oh, anyway, so we're down to the finalists being the TEAC. I was saying I don't know why or how the TEAC sounded so much better musically all around to me than the benchmark, but it did. And I've since repeated those just by comparing outside of the critical listening, just listening casually, and I still prefer the TEAC in its native mode. TEAC has a bunch of settings, upsampling, full DSD, all this other stuff. I didn't use that. Just in its native mode, it sounded better. So here's the winner. Between the two, and this took me quite some time to come up with. I really wanted to be sure I was hearing what I was hearing, and the winner is the Schiit. So price, I guess, didn't matter so much. I mean, I forget the prices, but the Schiit being $600 and some, and the benchmark being a couple of grand, and the TEAC being almost $1,000. I still preferred the Schiit. The Schiit Bifrost Multibit. Okay, my review does not apply to the Schiit Bifrost that's not the Multibit. Have no idea what that sounds like. Now, the score, if it was a football game, the Schiit would be 27 and the TEAC would be 21. So, won by a touchdown. Not quite the same disparity we saw between the benchmark and the Sonos, but you know, similar to the disparity I saw between the benchmark and the TEAC, but it was substantial. Okay, it didn't win by 3 points; it won by 7 points. Okay, it wasn't a Hail Mary at the end. It was enough. It was substantial. So let me talk about which I've mentioned before. It's very challenging, very difficult to describe in words what one hears, and I don't know all those fancy words that reviewers use. I'm just going to try to put it into plain language. Let's see. I have a mess of notes, and I had to boil them down to a few. Let me start out with my overall impressions. Well, let me go side by side. Hang on, let me find the where it is. Okay, so I did a blind test first. I hooked one. I have these cables dangling behind my my audio cabinet over there, and I didn't know which was which. But one of them went into CD input, one of them went into the line 1 input, and I A/B'd back and forth. The Schiit and the TEAC were equally. The outputs were about the same level, so there wasn't a, one wasn't louder than the other, which would give it an advantage in terms of loudness and accentuating bass and treble and that sort of thing. So neither one of them had a loudness advantage. The levels were pretty well equalized, and so I have pages of notes, and I'm not going to go through them all. But let me look at the overall impressions. And I listened to my 4 songs here, and I listened to a lot of other music too, quite a bit of other music, some jazz and a lot of country, because my nephew's staying with me and he listens to country. Some of those country songs are very well recorded as well, so I get to hear a lot of nuances, and a lot of, I use those for a lot of comparison and for vocals as well. So, bass slam, they were equal. Okay, the big thump of the kick drum, so to speak. They were very much equal in their ability to produce realism and that kick you in the gut kind of bass that my Klipsch speakers are fully capable of reproducing. Outstanding, those Klipsch. Some of the most accurate bass I've ever heard. The opposite of muddy. Bass resolution, the ability to resolve individual bass notes, about the same. Couldn't tell any difference there. Bass extension deep. Now, the Schiit, and by the way, the Schiit was hooked into the CD input, so this column is the Schiit. Okay, I would say this is a misnomer in this sense. I would say that they both could produce equally deep bass, but there's something about the presence of the bass in the Schiit. It was more enveloping. It was just there more, and I cannot describe it. Going back and forth. I mean, they were equally deep, but there was just more bass. But it wasn't more in a sense that like an equalizer, you slide up the bass tab. It wasn't like that. It was just, my best way to describe it is the bass presence was there, and it was more enveloping. And that was very noticeable. I don't know why I gave it 1 check. I'm going to give it 2 check marks there. Okay, so that part, the Schiit won. Okay, mid-range. Oh, I should have. Gosh, I didn't. What was it? I didn't add that there. I know I got lots of notes on mid-range. Mid-range, the Schiit just gets like, I don't know, as many check marks as I can give it. Outstanding. The ability to produce vocals, both male and female, with realism and presence and warmth and texture and everything. The Schiit just killed. It just wasn't even close. It's just remarkable. I don't know how the Schiit is able to do that, or what the reasons for it are. Again, I mentioned in my previous video, is it the fact that the Schiit is a multi-bit DAC and it's a much more direct way of converting digital to analog? Is that why? Or is it the output? Is it the analog buffers? The last bit of analog amplification that the signal is going to see before it gets sent to your amp. Is that what it is? I don't even know. Again, I mentioned this before. I don't even know what kind of analog circuitry the Schiit is using. They don't say on their website. Is it an op amp? Or is it the same discrete JFET junction field effect transistor stage that the Schiit non-multibit uses. I don't know. If someone knows that, I'd love to know. But mid-range is just, I would say, it's the shining star of this DAC. And of course, as we all know, the mid-range frequencies are just ultra critical in high-end audio. Ultra critical, and you know, between mid-range, treble, and bass, if something, you know, if two things had to suffer at the expense of one, I would take the mid-range as what I want. And by the way, in the mid-range frequencies, most, even though you can hear and feel bass and it's there and bright treble and all that, mid-range is where most instruments are. The energy from most instruments are in the mid-range frequencies. And I have a feeling that's why my overall preference was the Schiit. Okay, so now treble resolution. This is another shining star of, and this is going to be somewhat contradicted by this next row, treble accuracy, where the TEAC won. And I have a hard time of describing this, but let me say the resolution, the ability to resolve intricate, like hi-hat sizzle and some songs. I listened to a couple of Stereolab songs, and even I listened to Synchronicity, the album by the Police, and you know, some of Stuart Copeland's cymbals, and even on the Stereolab there were some triangles and some other instruments that were so far in the back you could barely hear them, but they were there. And when I A-B'd in Stuart Copeland's cymbals on Synchronicity 1, the ride cymbal and the bells on the cymbals, they were much more present and discernible on the Schiit. You could hear things, and it's an old cliche, but it's absolutely true. I could hear things in the treble on the Schiit that I simply, when I A-B, I could not decode or hear on the TEAC. I very rarely ever said that about any component. I used to hear people say, I heard things I could never hear before, and you know, mostly I didn't believe it, like, it's psychosomatic or something. But no, absolutely true in this case. I couldn't believe it. I wrote 4 pages in there one night. I'm not going to go through all this stuff, but I was sitting there one night and I just couldn't believe that the Schiit could be that much better in its ability to resolve intricate nuances in the treble. It was amazing. Enough about that. Now, what seems to be contradictory, and I can't describe it, is the accuracy, not the resolution, the ability to resolve things, but how accurate the treble sounded. You know, how lifelike. Does a cymbal really sound like a cymbal? Does a hi-hat really sound like a hi-hat? You know, and there are other instruments in the upper treble as well, but I use those as an example because I'm a drummer and I'm sensitive to those things. I think that, well, I know the TEAC seemed a little more accurate. There was something, despite the, and this is the only flaw I would say in the Schiit, is there's something a little, not flat, I don't know how to describe it, a little off about the upper treble. You know, it's just not quite, let's see, the word I used was sweetness. Okay, it's not quite as sweet. Okay, it's, you know, use a coffee analogy. Okay, if coffee is the upper treble, then the TEAC was perfectly sweetened and the Schiit was heartily sweetened. I don't know how to describe it, but if I could just have that same upper treble I had on the TEAC over at the Schiit, I think the Schiit would be what I would call perfect. Perfect. Okay. And I know that sounds contradictory, but that's just what I heard. Now, dynamics, both the same. The ability, and for dynamics, man, you go put on Who Are You by The Who and crank that thing up. Amazing. Keith Moon is astounding on that song, and everybody is. And there's no compression. There's no dynamic range compression on that song. And you can get a real sense for dynamics. Equal. Now, overall listenability, you know, which one am I drawn to? Which one do I want to listen to? Well, by far it was the Schiit. My notes are, it was another kind of cliche, but I have to use something to describe it, tube-like. And I think that derives from that warmth and textured mid-range. Tube-like vocals, warm, adds texture. Those are my notes. Many more notes. Just to read a few from my scratch right here. Treble, let's see. Much more resolved, mid-range, more realistic. The blacks were quieter. I'm just trying to skip over redundancy here. On the song Driven to Tears by the Police, the hi-hats, the bells on the cymbals, more information reproduced, subtle, better, hidden information. Again, I keep coming back to hi-hats and cymbals from the drummer, but so much more impressive. I'm just looking at my notes here. Right, treble. Oh yeah, and then on a song called Diagonals by Stereolab, on the Schiit, the bass was much more pronounced, seemed to resolve a little better, even though I think they're about the same. Deeper slam on the Schiit. Felt like I wasn't listening to a DAC. Warm, full, flat. Oh, on Analog Kid by Rush, hidden hi-hats and hidden hi-hat information that I could not hear on the TEAC. Okay, so you get the idea, right? And go on. Overall impressions. So last thing I'm going to say, before I do some, I'm going to attempt to do some listening samples between the two with a different microphone. Right? So overall impressions about the Schiit. These are about the Schiit, okay? I wanted to listen to it, drawn to it. Vocal textures, warm, tube-like, realistic, presence. Bass dynamics outstanding, resolved inner detail and nuance is way better than the other unit I have here, but now I know the other unit was the TEAC. Non-DAC-like quality, more listenable. Now, if I had to compare the two, as I've done in the previous, with little frequency response caricatures here, relative to each other, just to get a picture, a visual of how I perceive they differ, okay? So, remember, I start out in the bass area. Schiit was perfectly flat, but relative to the TEAC, there was just more of it in the lower. You know, they both went down to the same. You know, they both went down to the same frequency in terms of extension. There was just seemed to be more of it. So the TEAC is a bit tapered off there. It rises up, and then mid-range. Okay, this is the shining star again of the Schiit. It was just perfect. Whereas when I switched back and forth, I felt that there was the mid-range was shelved down or notched down a little bit in the TEAC. It was more hollow, less of it. And the TEAC, again, rises back up to produce the sweeter highs. And I feel that even though the resolution is better on the Schiit, there was less energy, so to speak, and it wasn't quite as sweet. So that's how I picture those two relative to each other, and that's all I have. Well, I'm going to try to find my other microphone and see if I can give you a sample. It didn't work very well last time, not at all. You can hear the differences between these DACs so well in person, but did not come through. There it is. Okay, so I was using an omnidirectional Sony voice recorder, but I'm going to plug this mic. I haven't used this in so long. I forgot even the brand name. Hold on, I'm shaking this camera all over, I know. The heck is this thing? I bought this off a recommendation from somebody, and it is a good mic. It is bass limited though. It does roll off early, but I'm not interested in the bass. There it is. Optica. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get this rig set up and see if I can with this mic. If I'm anyway, I'm not interested in showing you the bass because that's not going to come across on computer speakers probably anyway. But I want you to hear the differences in the mid-range and treble if possible. I'm gonna give it a try. All right, here we go. I got the rig. I got my cardioid microphone connected to the mic input to the Sony voice recorder. So that Sony voice recorder is receiving this mic. I have no idea what it's going to sound like. I'm not using the automatic compression. I'm adjusting the input level myself to preserve dynamics. So I'm not using the built-in dynamic range compression scheme at all. And I'm going to A/B between the TEAC NT-503 and the Schiit Bifrost Multibit. I'm going to try to speak into the mic to tell you which is which. I'm going to run through samples of all 4 songs. Got them set up. By the way, we're coming out of the Sonos. I'm using Spotify Premium. Sonos is configured for uncompressed audio. Going to run through my 4 songs here. Another Brick in the Wall 2, Driven to Tears, The Police, Sultans of Swing, Dire Straits, and Who Are You? Give little samples of each to see if you can pick up what I picked up. And I'm hoping that this new microphone does the trick and can reveal some differences. I am about ear level with the Klipsch. Oh yeah, the music is fed into my my Yamaha integrated amp. Wonderful amp, awesome, fantastic. That's a whole different video for another day. Let me turn on those VU meters. Got to see some VUs working, right? What else? Oh yeah, and we're feeding the Klipsch Forte 3s. Again, fantastic speakers. Love them. So I'm now going to start with the Schiit. I'm going to start with the Schiit, and let me just turn on my voice recorder here. A couple snaps so I can sync up the sound, and here we go. We don't need no education. That's the Schiit. We don't need no thought control. TEAC. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Schiit. Teacher, leave them kids alone. TEAC. Schiit. TEAC. We don't need no education. Schiit. We don't need no school control. TEAC. Schiit. Okay, I'm going to switch the song, but I got to adjust the volume on this, the sensitivity on the voice recorder. We're going to start out with the next song with the with the shit. Here we go.
Shiver in the dark, it's raining in the park. Meantime,
TEAC.
sound of the river, you stop and you hold everything. A band is blowing Dixie.
Shit.
Time. You feel alright when you hear the music ring.
TEAC.
Well, now you step inside, but you don't see too many faces.
Shit.
Coming in out of the rain, they hear the jazz go down. Competition, you know the
TEAC.
but the horns, they blowing that sound.
Shit.
How can you say that you're not responsible? What does
TEAC.
it do with me? What is my reaction?
Shit.
Should we be confronted by this needless atrocity? Driven to tears.
TEAC.
Driven to tears. Hide my face in my hand. Shame will
Shit.
uncomfortable existence is reduced to a shallow, meaningless party.
TEAC.
When some innocent die, all we can offer them is a page in some magazine.
Shit.
Was not enough food. This is what we've seen.
TEAC. Shit. TEAC. Shit.
I woke up in a Soho doorway, a policeman knew my name. He said, you can go
TEAC.
tonight if you can get up and walk away. I staggered back to the underground and the breeze blew back my hair. I remember throwing punches around and preaching from my chair. Well, who are you?
Shit.
I really want to know. Tell me, who are you?
And for a portion, for the rest of this song, I'm going to just play it on the shit so you can just get an idea about the shit, because it is the winter. So here we go.
I really want to know. I took the cube back out of town, back to the rolling mill. I felt a little like a dying clown with a street dog intention. I stretched back and I hiccuped and looked back on my busy day. 11 hours in the
hope that gives you an idea. I don't know how it's going to come across when I upload this to the computer, but I hope for the best. And that's the end of this series. Thanks for watching and for all the kind comments from those of you who care enough to leave them. I appreciate that. Till next time, take care. Ciao.